Her granddaughter whispered, "She's next." During her own son's funeral, Lucille Harper, retired etiquette teacher and widow, didn't turn her head. Tara, born into inheritance but raised on entitlement, was already scrolling for sympathy. By the time they reached the attorney's office, the silver spoon was all she'd inherit. Lucille had spent decades teaching restraint. Now she was practicing correction. And when they came for her legacy, they found nothing left but lessons. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The air inside Harper & Sons' funeral parlor was thick with lilies and old secrets. The scent pressed close to Lucille Harper's skin, sweet and suffocating all at once. She sat in the front row, spine straight despite the ache in her back, gloved hands folded neatly over her lap. Her black pearls gleamed faintly against her throat, a final gesture of discipline in a world that had forgotten what grace meant. Behind her, whispers rippled like moths against silk. Church acquaintances, neighbors, women who'd once copied her recipes or envied her posture, now they murmured about loss, inheritance, and age. Lucille didn't turn. The performance of mourning required composure, and she had spent a lifetime perfecting it. The preacher's voice droned on about mercy and everlasting rest. The coffin, mahogany, polished, impersonal, waited at the front like punctuation on a sentence no one wanted to read again. It wasn't until the final prayer ended that Lucille let herself breathe. Beside her, Tara leaned forward, strands of blonde hair framing a face made for phone screens, not funerals. Her perfume, something sugary and loud, cut through the lilies. Then came the whisper. "She's next." 2 words, a hiss barely louder than breath, but they sliced through the hush like a knife through fondant. Lucille didn't move, not a blink, not a tremor. Her eyes stayed on the coffin, her lips pressed into the faintest, most civilized smile. But inside, something ancient and razor-edged stirred awake. Across the aisle, Eric Stanton, the funeral director, caught the moment. His face, practiced in neutrality, flickered. Just a beat of surprise before it smoothed back into sympathy. He'd heard it too. Lucille's gloved fingers tightened on her clutch until the leather groaned. From behind her tissue, Allison Bloom's mouth curved into a knowing smirk. It wasn't grief on her face. It was calculation, that sharp little glint Lucille had seen since her daughter was 12, and learned that charm could be weaponized. Miriam Rhodes, seated on Lucille's right, leaned just enough for her hand to find Lucille's wrist. Her touch was light but grounding, her voice a whisper too low for anyone else. "Easy, dear heart." Lucille's breath came slow, deliberate. "I am," she said softly. The guests began to rise, shuffling into motion, their sympathy phrases rehearsed and meaningless. Someone dabbed at their eyes for show. Someone else commented on the floral arrangements. Tara was already back on her phone, thumbs darting, likely drafting a caption about legacy and loss for her followers. Lucille turned her head, finally meeting her granddaughter's reflection in the dark window glass. Tara didn't notice. The girl's face was a mirror of entitlement, perfect makeup, no trace of shame. Eric approached quietly. "Mrs. Harper," he said, voice respectful but edged with curiosity. "We'll be closing the casket soon. Would you like a private moment before we move it to the coach?" Lucille looked at him, reading the faint concern in his eyes. "No," she said. "The dead have had enough of my time." For the briefest moment she thought she saw him suppress a smile, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a steel most people missed in women her age. As the crowd drifted toward the doors, Miriam helped Lucille rise. Her cane clicked once against the polished floor, echoing through the hush. Lucille paused at the coffin, not for sentiment, but ceremony. Her gaze traced the carved wood, the brass nameplate, the reflection of herself in its sheen. "You hurt her," Lucille murmured under her breath. Miriam's brow furrowed. "What was that, dear?" Lucille's eyes flicked toward Tara, now laughing at something on her phone near the doorway. "Just a reminder," she said. "Some lessons come late." Outside, Spanish moss hung heavy from the oaks, filtering the afternoon light into something ghostly. The hearse waited by the curb, engine low, as if even it understood the weight of family politics. Allison called out, "Mother, the attorney's office is expecting us. Don't take too long." Lucille didn't answer. She adjusted her gloves, straightened her hat, and moved forward with the kind of poise that made people step aside without realizing why. As she reached the door, a breeze caught her veil, brushing it across her face like a soft warning. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard her late husband's voice, steady and calm. "They think you're fading, Lucy. Let them." She stepped into the light, her silhouette sharp against the marble threshold. Behind her, Eric Stanton stood by the casket, still watching her. There was something wary in his gaze, an understanding that this funeral might be the quietest moment this family would ever know. Lucille paused only once, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "She said I'm next," she murmured. "She might be right, but not for the reasons she thinks." Then she walked on, leaving behind the hush, the coffin, and the echo of a war that hadn't yet begun. Samuel Pike's office smelled faintly of cedar polish and old law books, a scent that belonged to another century, one that didn't rush or beg. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting amber over the walnut paneling and the tidy rows of framed diplomas. The air was too still, too civilized for what was about to unfold. Lucille Harper sat in the high-backed chair nearest the desk, her cane resting beside her, her posture regal enough to make the leather creak. Across from her, Allison Bloom crossed one leg over the other, impatience flickering in the tap of her heel against the Persian rug. Tara sprawled on the settee, scrolling her phone, the faint glow lighting her expression with bored indifference. Her nails, white-tipped and immaculate, clicked against the glass like a metronome marking the seconds before the inevitable. "Such a lovely room," Allison said, voice brittle as cut glass. "I suppose some people never tire of tradition." Samuel Pike adjusted his glasses, unmoved. His silver hair gleamed beneath the ceiling fan's slow rotation. He was a man who had spent a lifetime guarding secrets for Savannah's oldest families, and the Harper estate was one of his longest chapters. Lucille didn't respond. Her gloved hands rested in her lap, unmoving, her eyes steady on the edge of Samuel's desk. There was no need for words. Her silence had always been sharper than anyone's speech. Allison leaned closer to her daughter and whispered, just loud enough for the room to hear. "She's barely holding on. This won't take long." Lucille caught the reflection of their shared smirk in the glass cabinet behind Samuel, 2 generations of arrogance masquerading as concern. She felt Miriam's absence keenly. Her friend had stayed home, citing a headache, though Lucille suspected she simply didn't want to witness the family's ugliness firsthand. Samuel opened a narrow drawer and withdrew 3 cream-colored envelopes, each sealed with blue wax. He laid them on the desk in a perfect row. The faintest scrape of paper against wood filled the silence. Tara sighed dramatically. "Do we really need the ceremony? It's not like this is some movie." Samuel looked up at her, eyes mild but unyielding. "Formality, Miss Bloom, is the difference between dignity and chaos. Your grandmother prefers the former." Lucille's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Allison rolled her eyes. "Samuel, can we please get on with it? We're all still processing." The pause she left before the word processing made it sound like performance. Samuel folded his hands. "Very well." He broke the first seal, sliding a stack of typed pages onto the blotter. "This is the last will and testament of Mrs. Lucille Harper, notarized and witnessed 6 months ago. He cleared his throat, his tone crisp and deliberate. First beneficiary, Miss Tara Bloom. The words dropped into the room like a match into oil. Tara's phone froze mid-scroll. Her eyes widened, the spark of victory flashing so fast Lucille almost admired the speed of her self-interest. Allison sat back, a triumphant little inhale betraying her satisfaction. Lucille remained perfectly still, the same serene expression carved across her face. Only Samuel, who knew her best, caught the faint tightening at her jawline, a small tell that something larger waited beneath. Tara leaned forward, her voice sugar-coated. Well, I mean, that's only fair, right? I'm her only grandchild. Family legacy and all that. Samuel said nothing, only slid a small velvet box across the desk toward her. The sound it made against the polished wood was soft, final. "What's this?" she asked, the faintest wrinkle forming between her brows. "Your inheritance," he said. Tara laughed. "You're kidding." Lucille's eyes finally moved, slowly, deliberately, meeting her granddaughter's. "Family starts with small things, dear. You might try holding on to this one." Tara flipped open the lid. Inside, cushioned in black velvet, lay a single silver spoon. Heavy, ornate, polished until it gleamed like moonlight. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Allison gave a brittle laugh. "This is a trick. What do they call it? A test of character. There's more, obviously." Samuel's expression didn't change. "The will is final. It was properly filed and witnessed." Tara stared at the spoon as though it might transform into gold if she glared long enough. "You can't be serious." Lucille rose from her chair with measured grace, every motion controlled. "I assure you, my dear, I am entirely serious." She adjusted her gloves, her pearls catching the light. "You should keep that safe. You'll find it more valuable than you realize." The room seemed to constrict around the tension, centuries of old Southern civility fighting to contain raw fury. Allison shot to her feet. "You've lost your mind, Mother. This is humiliation." Lucille met her gaze evenly. "No, Allison, this is inheritance. One day you'll understand the difference." Samuel closed the folder, aligning it precisely with the edge of the desk. The scrape of the chair legs against the rug sounded louder than thunder. Tara's face flushed pink with fury, and for the first time, she looked small. Like the child who once smashed Lucille's porcelain teapot because it wasn't hers to touch. Lucille turned to Samuel. "We're finished here, I believe." "Yes, Mrs. Harper," he said softly. As Lucille walked toward the door, cane tapping the rhythm of calm defiance, Tara's voice broke through, sharp and trembling. "You'll regret this." Lucille didn't turn. "Possibly," she said, "but not today." The door shut behind her with the quiet finality of a gavel. The spoon lay between them like a challenge, bright silver against Samuel Pike's dark walnut desk, its handle engraved with the faint outline of magnolia blossoms. It was too delicate to belong to the moment, too beautiful to make sense of the fury building in the room. Tara Bloom stared at it as if it were an insult made of metal. "This?" she whispered, voice dripping disbelief. "This is it?" Lucille Harper didn't answer. She sat perfectly still, the soft leather of her gloves whispering against each other as she folded her hands once more in her lap. Her face was serene, the calm of a woman who had practiced composure so long it had hardened into armor. The room itself seemed to hesitate. The air held its breath. Even the ceiling fan slowed. Allison Bloom's laughter broke through, high and brittle. "Mother, for God's sake, what kind of twisted little game is this? You're giving her a spoon? You expect anyone to believe that's real?" Samuel Pike did not flinch. "It's real," he said quietly. "And it was signed and witnessed on March 14th of last year." The documents are in order. Allison turned on him. Samuel, I have known you since my father's funeral. Don't patronize me. There's a mistake here, and you know it. He regarded her with patient weariness. There's no mistake, Allison. Your mother is of sound mind and fully competent. We verified every line. The color drained from Tara's face, replaced by a blotchy red that rose fast to her cheeks. She snatched the spoon from the box and held it up, light glinting off the polished bowl. Is this supposed to be symbolic or something? Some cryptic message about manners? Am I supposed to be grateful? Lucille's gaze shifted at last, cool and steady. Family starts with small things, she said softly. How we use them. How we keep them. Allison slammed her palm against the desk. You can't possibly think this is funny. Lucille's tone never lifted, never cracked. I think it's fair. The silence that followed was so sharp that the creak of the floorboards beneath Samuel's shoes sounded like thunder. Tara's hand shook slightly, the spoon trembling in her grip. The shine of it caught her distorted reflection. Wide eyes, pinched mouth, disbelief curdling into rage. This is humiliating, Tara said finally, voice low and venomous. You always said I was special. You said I reminded you of yourself. Lucille tilted her head just a fraction. That was before you proved me right about something else. What's that? That resemblance can be a curse. Allison surged to her feet, fury breaking through her usual poise. Enough. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Sitting there, watching us squirm? You've gone cruel, Mother. Vindictive. Lucille rose too, the cane beside her chair clicking once against the rug as she steadied herself. Cruelty requires intent, she said. This is correction. Samuel cleared his throat quietly, his way of reminding the room that the law was present even amid chaos. The will stands, he said, and it's not open for reinterpretation. Allison spun on him. You should be ashamed, Samuel. You helped her write this nonsense. He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. On the contrary, Allison, I helped her make sure it would hold. Tara turned the spoon over in her hands, the magnolia engraving catching in the light. The metal felt heavier than it looked, weighted with meaning she couldn't name. So that's it? She asked finally. That's what I get for being the last of your family? Lucille moved toward the door, her cane's rhythm steady, almost musical. Last doesn't always mean heir, dear. Sometimes it just means witness. From the corner, the door opened softly. Miriam Rhodes stepped in, a scarf wrapped around her neck, her expression unreadable. She must have arrived late. Lucille had told her to stay home, but of course Miriam never listened when things turned interesting. Ah, Miriam said lightly, her voice a warm current in the chill. I see I missed the celebration. Her eyes flicked to the spoon, then to Lucille, and the faintest knowing smile curved her lips. Tara glared at her. What's so funny? Nothing, Miriam said, still smiling. It's just remarkable how history repeats itself. The Harpers have always underestimated silver. Lucille gave a small nod toward her friend, then reached for her gloves. We're done here. Allison's voice snapped through the quiet. You'll regret this, Mother. Everyone in Savannah will hear about it. You'll be a laughingstock. Lucille paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. The light from the window framed her like a portrait, an older woman carved from calm defiance. I was a teacher of poise for 40 years, she said. I'm quite comfortable being watched. Then she left, the scent of her perfume lingering, faint and dignified, as the door shut behind her. Miriam lingered, her eyes still on Tara. It's a fine piece of silver, she said. You should keep it close. You never know what it might unlock. Tara looked down at the spoon, confusion warring with anger. Unlock what? But Miriam was already gone, her laughter floating down the hall like a secret no one else was meant to understand. The evening light slanted through the lace curtains, painting the sitting room in faded gold. Dust motes drifted lazily above the mantel where portraits of a family now fractured smiled down as though still whole. The house on Habersham Street had been Lucille Harper's stage and sanctuary for 6 decades, its quiet corners still loyal when people were not. Lucille crossed the threshold without speaking, her cane tapping rhythmically against the tile, the silver spoon held delicately in her gloved hand. It gleamed faintly under the chandelier's waning glow, a small, polished witness to what had just transpired. She placed it on the mantel beside her late husband's photograph. He looked out from his silver frame, handsome and stoic in uniform, eyes steady with that old promise. "I'll handle what you can't." Lucille adjusted the spoon so it caught the light. "I'm handling it," she murmured. From the kitchen came the soft clatter of teacups. Miriam Rhodes, as dependable as the tide, had let herself in through the garden door. She wore her robe over her clothes, hair pinned in a loose knot, the faintest trace of lipstick smeared on the rim of her teacup. "Chamomile, or something stronger?" she asked, voice carrying the warmth of old battles fought side by side. Lucille hung her hat on the rack. "Chamomile," she said, "for tonight." Miriam poured with care, the steam curling between them like ghosts of conversations past. "I saw the look on Allison's face when you walked out," she said, handing Lucille her cup. "Reminded me of that girl in etiquette class who used to cheat off your tests. What was her name? The one you caught and never told on." "Sharon Clements," Lucille said, a faint smile ghosting across her face. "She wrote me an apology letter 30 years later. Allison never will." Miriam eased into the armchair opposite her. "They forget what you're capable of, Luce. That's what happens when you age gracefully. They mistake it for softness." Lucille stirred her tea, the spoon chiming lightly against porcelain. "Softness gets you dismissed," she said. "Dismissal gets you underestimated." "And underestimation," Miriam said, raising her cup, "is leverage." Lucille nodded, sipping her tea. Her eyes wandered to the bookshelves lining the wall, each title meticulously ordered, each spine dusted by her own hand. It was a library of her life's precision, her way of keeping the world in order even when people refused to be. She rose slowly, her knees protesting, and crossed to the writing desk by the window. The air carried the faint scent of cedar and something older. Paper, ink, time itself. She pulled open the bottom drawer, the one Samuel Pike had helped her organize last spring, and withdrew a small brown envelope sealed in wax. Her initials, LMH, were pressed deep into the surface. The handwriting beneath read in Samuel's careful script, "Primary Asset Records, Harper Estate. Confidential." She ran her fingertips along the edge, then lifted the flap. Inside lay several documents: property deeds, certificates of sale, trust fund verifications. Beneath them, carefully folded and bound with blue ribbon, was a second envelope, this one bearing no label at all. Lucille's breath slowed. She knew what it was before she opened it. The second will. Her real one. The paper inside was thicker, creamier, marked with her penmanship, not Samuel's. It listed no familiar names. No Bloom, no Tara, no Allison. Instead, it named charities, scholarships, preservation funds, causes that would outlast every ounce of bitterness in her bloodline. At the bottom, her signature glimmered beside the seal she'd pressed herself, the wax deep red like dried wine. Behind her, Miriam's voice broke the stillness. "That it?" Lucille didn't turn. "That's the one they'll never touch." She refolded the document, replaced the ribbon, and slid it back into the envelope. Her cane clicked once against the floor as she moved toward the portrait hanging above the fireplace. Her husband, forever 39, forever watching. Lucille pressed a fingertip against the bottom of the frame. With a soft mechanical click, the hinge released. The portrait swung open to reveal the small steel safe inset into the wall. The keypad blinked awake at her touch. 6193. Her wedding date. The lock gave way with a satisfying hum. Inside, among stacks of sealed envelopes and old jewelry boxes, waited the empty space she had reserved years ago for one final secret. She placed the second will inside, resting it carefully atop a velvet pouch that once held her engagement ring. "For safekeeping," she whispered. Miriam rose, her voice soft but knowing. "You're ready, aren't you?" Lucille closed the safe and pressed the frame shut. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Age-lined, yes, but steady as the oak beams above. "Readiness is just another kind of memory," she said. "And I remember everything they've said to me." Miriam set her empty cup down and stepped closer. "Including today?" Lucille turned toward the mantel, toward the gleam of silver catching firelight. "Especially today." Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the river, echoing through the quiet streets of Savannah. Lucille drew the curtains, leaving only the spoon illuminated by the flicker of the fireplace. It gleamed like a promise, or a warning. Her voice was low when she spoke again, more to the flame than to Miriam. "They think I gave them a spoon. What I really gave them was notice." The storm that had threatened Savannah the night before had passed, but the air still felt electric, charged with something unseen, like the moment before a verdict is read. Lucille Harper sat at her breakfast table in a pale robe, sunlight glancing off her teacup as she read the local paper. The society section mentioned the Harper estate hearing in a single clipped line. "Probate review requested by heirs Bloom and Bloom." No surprise there. The ink was barely dry before her daughter went running to the courthouse. The paper trembled only slightly as Lucille turned the page. Not from nerves, those had long burned out, but from the faint tremor that came with age. Across the kitchen, Miriam Rhodes was buttering toast, pretending not to watch her friend too closely. "They moved fast," Miriam said finally, sliding the knife back onto its plate. "Allison always did prefer shortcuts," Lucille replied. "She inherited her father's ambition, just not his restraint." Miriam snorted softly. "And the girl? Tara?" Lucille's voice cooled. "She inherited nothing but entitlement." From outside came the distant whir of a delivery truck, one of several that had come and gone all week. Lucille had instructed her staff at the Harper House of Antiques to begin inventory reduction, a genteel phrase for selling off decades of treasures under private invoice. She'd been liquidating assets quietly, one painting, one chandelier, one porcelain figurine at a time. Each sale funded something more enduring, the scholarship trust that would carry her name long after her family stopped using it. The shop phone had rung 3 times that morning. Buyers, appraisers, inquiries. Each was met with Lucille's same polite answer: "Everything worth keeping already has a home." Across town, Allison and Tara were storming through Samuel Pike's office, demanding explanations that did not exist. Samuel, ever the professional, had arrived armed with proof: copies of notarizations, video verification, and a neat stack of receipts. "Mrs. Harper's mental faculties are impeccable," he told them, tone like chilled water. "Every revision is documented and witnessed. I'm afraid you have no standing to contest." Allison's response, according to Samuel's later recounting, had been unprintable. Tara, however, had taken her outrage public. Within hours, her social media lit up with posts about elder manipulation and toxic family betrayal. Her boyfriend, a man who looked like he thought mirrors were invented for him personally, posted a photograph of the two of them at brunch. His caption read, "Guess we're not getting that inheritance house." The comments were merciless. By late afternoon, Savannah's social circle, an ecosystem of whispers wrapped in pearls, was humming. They didn't need to know every detail to sense scandal. And Lucille, being who she was, understood one thing about scandal better than anyone. If you couldn't silence it, you redirected it. That evening, she dressed in a cream blouse, pearls shining faintly against her throat, and staged her own response. The spoon rested on the mantel beside a small deed box tied with a silk ribbon. She adjusted the lighting, soft but deliberate, and snapped a single photograph. No caption. She simply posted it to her private account, followed mostly by other women of her generation, patrons of the symphony, donors to preservation societies, old students from her etiquette days. Within an hour, it had been screenshotted, shared, dissected. The comments poured in. Exquisite restraint. The Harper dignity lives on. Tied with silk, not spite. By midnight, the image had gone quiet viral among Savannah's upper crust, the kind of viral where people whisper your name at dinner parties and call it admiration. Miriam read the comments aloud as she scrolled, amused. "You've turned a scandal into a seminar," she said. "Only you could weaponize good taste." Lucille smiled faintly, setting down her teacup. Style and strategy are often mistaken for the same thing. "You're enjoying this," Miriam said. "I'm enduring it," Lucille corrected. "There's a difference." Miriam leaned back, her scarf slipping slightly from her shoulder. "Still," she said, voice softening, "it's quite the show you've given them. The will, the spoon, the photograph. You've outplayed them at every move." Lucille looked at her, one brow arched. "Every move they've seen." Miriam's smile faded. "Meaning?" Lucille rose, moving toward the mantel where the spoon gleamed under lamplight. Her fingers brushed the cool metal, tracing its curve. "Samuel filed the public will, the one I signed last spring." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "Public will?" Lucille turned toward her, that calm, precise expression slipping just enough for the steel beneath to show. "Yes," she said. "The one they'll tear apart in court until they realize it gives them nothing to win." The realization dawned slow, then sharp across Miriam's face. "You gave them the public will." Lucille nodded once. "Not the real one," Miriam finished, voice low, the edge of awe softening her words. Lucille returned to her chair, lifting her teacup again as if discussing weather. "I gave them exactly what they earned." Outside, the church bells struck 7, each chime echoing down the cobblestone streets. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again. Less a storm, more a promise. Lucille's gaze lingered on the spoon, the ribbon, and the flame reflected in her window. "They wanted my legacy," she said quietly. "Now they can watch me write it." By the time dawn crept across the squares of Savannah, the Harper residence had already become an object of rumor. The Grand Victorian on Habersham Street, 3 stories of history wrapped in iron lacework, was whispered to be in transition. No one quite knew what that meant. But in this city, uncertainty spread faster than truth. Lucille Harper opened the front doors herself that morning, letting the soft coastal air glide through the foyer. The smell of lemon oil and lavender lingered from the night before. She had always believed even endings should be fragrant. On the marble table beneath the staircase sat a folder marked "Private Sale, by appointment only." The ink was dry, the papers notarized, and her name, Lucille M. Harper, signed in steady cursive at the bottom of each page. She had chosen her buyer carefully. A preservation-minded developer from Charleston who valued architecture over profit. No brokers, no public listings, just quiet negotiation. When Miriam arrived later that morning, she found Lucille standing at the parlor window, watching sunlight thread through the Spanish moss. "So it's true," Miriam said, voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "You're really selling it." Lucille nodded, still facing the glass. A house is just a story that stops belonging to you once the wrong people start telling it. Miriam joined her at the window, peering out to the garden where the new sign had been placed, a discreet brass plaque on a wrought iron post. For sale by appointment. The letters gleamed softly, unassuming yet final. Samuel helped finalize the terms yesterday, Lucille added. Cash offer. No contingencies. They'll keep the gardens intact. Miriam whistled low. You've thought of everything. Lucille's eyes tracked the gate at the end of the path. Not everything, she said. But enough. They didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon, a black SUV stopped just beyond the fence. Tara stepped out first, dressed as though attending an influencer luncheon instead of an ambush. Wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, and anger disguised as confidence. Allison followed, her heels sinking slightly into the soft soil, irritation flashing across her face. Miriam, catching sight of them from the window, muttered, "And here come the vultures." Lucille didn't bother replying. She smoothed the front of her blouse, took up her cane, and walked out through the foyer. The iron gate creaked as she approached, the weight of its history groaning like something tired of repetition. Tara was the first to speak. "You can't sell this house," she said, voice quivering despite its defiance. "It's been in the family forever. You said we were blood." Lucille met her gaze evenly. Blood isn't a bank account. The words landed heavy between them, cutting through the afternoon like heat through fog. Allison crossed her arms. "You're not thinking clearly. This house's legacy, it's—" Lucille lifted a hand. "It's mine." Allison's jaw tightened. "This is punishment, isn't it? For not being the daughter you wanted?" Lucille's expression didn't waver. "You were exactly the daughter I expected." For a moment, no one moved. The wind stirred the ivy, the faint hum of cicadas filling the silence. Tara's phone slipped from her fingers into the dirt, landing with a muted thud. "Good," Lucille said softly. "Now you're grounded, if only for a moment." She turned, walking back toward the house, her cane striking the cobblestone path in a rhythm that carried more authority than any argument. Miriam appeared at the doorway, calm as always, holding a clipboard and a measuring tape. "You want them inside?" she asked quietly. Lucille didn't look back. "No, they've had their chance to live here." Inside, the house was already transforming. Miriam had begun staging it. Silk drapes freshly steamed, silver polished, furniture arranged with surgical precision. Every vase held white hydrangeas, every frame dusted. Lucille's touch lingered in the symmetry, the grace of deliberate order. "This place could sell itself," Miriam said, adjusting a painting by half an inch. "But it's the details that make it sing." Lucille nodded. "That's what people forget. Revenge isn't always about what you take. It's about what you leave perfect behind." Miriam smiled faintly, pausing to study her friend. "You're not just selling a house, are you?" Lucille traced the edge of the banister with her fingertip, the wood smooth from years of polish. "No," she said. "I'm evicting a ghost." Outside, she could hear the distant sound of Allison's SUV engine revving and the tires crunching against gravel. Defeat accelerated into retreat. Miriam followed her gaze to the mantel, where the silver spoon still gleamed under soft light. "You'll keep that, won't you?" Lucille's lips curved. "Of course. Some heirlooms aren't for sale." As dusk deepened, the house filled with the scent of wax and lemon again. The air seemed to hold its breath, as though aware it was about to belong to someone else. Lucille paused at the foot of the staircase, her cane planted firmly on the polished floor. "Tomorrow," she said, "we finish the staging." "And after that?" Miriam asked. Lucille looked toward the front door, where the last of the day's light spilled in gold streaks across the marble. "After that," she said quietly, We let the living haunt themselves. Morning came sharp and bright, the kind of Savannah morning that made the world look polished and cruel at once. Dew clung to the wrought iron gate, and somewhere beyond it, the faint hum of a phone camera cut through the quiet. Lucille, Harper stood at the upstairs window, lace curtains framing her like an old portrait. Below, on the sidewalk just outside her gate, Tara Bloom paced in full performance mode. Her phone was raised, the ring light clipped to its edge, her voice pitched to that familiar influencer tone, saccharine over steel. "This," Tara said to her followers, sweeping her manicured hand toward the house, "is what elder abuse looks like. My grandmother, who, frankly, isn't of sound mind anymore, has been manipulated into selling our family home. She's suffering from dementia, and these people are letting her do this. We're trying to stop it before it's too late." Lucille watched her through the glass, her jaw tightening slightly. Tara adjusted the camera, ensuring the house loomed large behind her, a backdrop to her false concern. "#justice," Tara said softly, pressing a hand to her chest as though auditioning for sainthood. "#protect our elders." Downstairs, Miriam was already at the breakfast table reading the Savannah Tribune. When Lucille entered, she looked up and said, "I see your granddaughter's gone into public relations." Lucille poured herself coffee. She always did mistake attention for justice. Miriam smirked, scrolling through her phone. She spelled dementia right at least. That's progress. Lucille sipped from her cup, unamused. If she's going to lie, she could at least lie with dignity. "She's her mother's daughter," Miriam replied, folding the paper neatly. "Sloppy with truth, but obsessed with optics." Lucille set her cup down, the porcelain clicking lightly against the saucer. "Optics I can fix." She crossed to her writing desk, the morning light catching her pearls. With deliberate calm, she picked up the phone and dialed Samuel Pike's direct line. "Samuel," she said when he answered, "I need you to document an instance of public defamation. My granddaughters decided to broadcast my medical incompetence to the world." There was the faint rustle of papers on his end. "Send me the link," he said. "I'll make it official before lunch." "And Samuel?" "Yes?" "Draft a letter barring her from approaching the property. Effective immediately." "Consider it done, Lucille." When she hung up, Miriam leaned back in her chair, eyebrows raised. "You always did prefer strategy over spectacle." Lucille's lips curved slightly. "Let them drown in their own noise. I'll remain the quiet storm." By early afternoon, a black sedan pulled up outside. Samuel stepped out, immaculate in his tailored gray suit, a folder tucked under one arm. Tara was still filming when he approached the gate. He handed her a single sheet of paper through the bars, formal, embossed, unmistakably legal. She blinked, reading the first few lines, her face drained of color. "What is this?" "Notice of no contact," Samuel said evenly. "You are hereby barred from the Harper estate and all matters pertaining to its sale or assets. Any further interference will constitute trespassing and defamation under Georgia law." Tara's camera caught her own bewilderment, the live stream audience watching her composure falter. "You can't do that," she snapped. Samuel adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Harper can do precisely that." He walked away before she could respond, his calm footsteps echoing against the cobblestone walk. The live feed ended abruptly. By the next morning, the new buyer arrived, a refined woman in her 50s named Eleanor Graves, dressed in linen and quiet confidence. She and Lucille toured the home together, their conversation smooth, businesslike. Eleanor paused in the parlor, fingers grazing the polished edge of the fireplace. "This house feels resolute," she said finally, "like it's saying goodbye on its own terms." Lucille smiled faintly. "That's because it is." When the offer came through an hour later, well above the asking price, Samuel called to confirm. "Full payment," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. You've outnegotiated everyone, as usual. Lucille let out a breath that was almost laughter. Good. Let them know I may be old, but I'm not for sale. Miriam appeared in the doorway then, carrying a small box wrapped in pale ribbon. A token, she said, setting it on the table. From one survivor of family drama to another. Lucille untied the ribbon. Inside lay a simple brass key. To what? She asked. Miriam smiled. To whatever comes next. Lucille turned it over in her hand, its weight solid. Familiar. Through the window, the for sale sign caught the light, its brass letters glinting like a full stop. Outside, the garden swayed gently in the breeze. The azaleas were in bloom again, bright, defiant, unapologetically alive. Lucille set the key down beside her teacup, her voice steady, certain. They can have the past, she said. I'm keeping the future. The morning after the sale closed, Lucille Harper's name shimmered in crisp black ink across a final set of documents, signature steady, unwavering. With each stroke of her pen, a small empire quietly shifted out of her family's reach. Down on Bull Street, inside the glass-paneled calm of Savannah National Bank, Allison Bloom sat at a polished oak desk, her patience stretched thin. The banker across from her, a young man with immaculate cuffs and nerves of glass, kept his hands folded neatly over a file he refused to open. I'm Mrs. Harper's daughter, Allison said for the third time, her tone sugar-dipped but shaking at the edges. I'm simply concerned. My mother's transferring funds at a rate that doesn't make sense for someone her age. I just need to confirm where those accounts are going. The banker offered a practiced smile, the kind reserved for volatile customers and ticking clocks. I understand your concern, Ms. Bloom. But without a power of attorney or probate authority, I'm legally unable to discuss any client's finances. You must have some discretion, Allison pressed. She's been confused lately, forgetting details, making rash decisions. Mrs. Harper is one of our most organized clients, he interrupted smoothly. Her documentation is current, her transactions precise. There's nothing irregular to report. Allison's mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to being dismissed by men in suits. I'll have my attorney reach out, she said coldly. The banker rose, extending a polite hand she ignored. Of course. Have a lovely day, Ms. Bloom. Outside, the Savannah heat hit her like judgment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tara. He won't tell me anything either. She's hiding something big. Allison typed back with shaking fingers. Then we find another way. Across town, Lucille was already 2 steps ahead. She stood in the lobby of a modest credit union, quiet, no marble, no theatrics, just warmth and privacy. Miriam sat nearby, leafing through a brochure about senior trust accounts, pretending not to eavesdrop. The manager, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice, reviewed Lucille's documents. You're transferring all existing accounts here, Mrs. Harper? Every penny, Lucille said, and placing them under the Harper Educational Trust, effective immediately. The woman nodded, impressed. A wise move, keeps it untouchable. Lucille allowed herself a thin smile. That's the idea. As signatures were witnessed and sealed, Miriam set her magazine down. You know, most people your age are collecting knickknacks and gossip. You're out here rewriting your financial legacy. Lucille slipped her pen into her bag. Legacy is simply what's left once the noise stops. Miriam grinned. Then I suppose you're turning down the volume. Lucille's eyes flicked toward the window, where the sunlight struck her reflection. Silver hair, pearls, resolve. No, my dear, she said softly. I'm changing the station. That afternoon, Lucille sat at her writing desk again, surrounded by papers and the faint scent of magnolia polish. She took a long breath, then dialed her physician's office. This is Lucille Harper, she said when the nurse answered. I'd like to revoke all shared medical authorizations, effective immediately. No family members are to have access to my records or decisions. The nurse hesitated. Even your daughter, Mrs. Harper? Especially my daughter. Her tone was calm, resolute. When the nurse confirmed, Lucille thanked her politely and hung up. Miriam, who'd been standing in the doorway, raised an eyebrow. You're cutting cords like a surgeon. Lucille looked up. Surgery saves lives. So does distance. Later that week, Miriam drove her friend out past the river to the quiet, moss-draped cemetery where her husband rested. The groundskeeper waved them through the open gate, the hum of cicadas rising around them like an old hymn. Lucille stepped carefully along the gravel path, cane tapping softly. The marble headstones gleamed in the afternoon sun, each one a marker of closure. I always meant to finish this years ago, Lucille said, as they approached her husband's plot. But I suppose I was waiting for the right kind of clarity. Miriam stayed a respectful few steps behind as Lucille knelt, fingers brushing the edge of the stone. Then, with deliberate calm, she unfolded a sketch, the design draft for her own marker. 2 names, carved side by side beneath a shared epitaph she had chosen herself. Dignity outlasts blood. The stonemason nodded approvingly when she handed it over. Elegant, he said. Simple, but final. That's the point, Lucille replied. Miriam watched her, the wind tugging gently at her scarf. Most people flinch when they see their name in stone, she said. Lucille smiled, straightening. Most people wait too long to decide what should be written there. The mason tipped his hat, carrying the design back toward the workshop. The late sun caught the lines of the drawing one last time before it disappeared from view. Lucille looked at Miriam, her expression neither grim nor sentimental, just precise. When they come looking for control, she said, they'll find nothing left to hold. A gust of wind lifted the Spanish moss above them, scattering sunlight like dust. Lucille turned toward the car, her cane clicking softly against the stone path. Steady, assured, the rhythm of a woman who had finally claimed the narrative. Behind her, the unfinished headstone waited, glinting pale in the afternoon light, a promise and a warning both. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, polish, and too much ambition. The walls were the color of old parchment, and the ceiling fan spun lazily, as if unimpressed by the drama about to unfold. Lucille Harper stepped through the heavy oak doors with her head high, pearls gleaming against her throat and black gloves smoothing every trace of tremor from her hands. Miriam walked beside her, steady and watchful, like the one person in the room who understood that grace could be a form of warfare. The gallery buzzed when they entered. Reporters lined the back benches, notebooks ready, their curiosity sharpened by whispers of the Harper case. Allison sat at the plaintiff's table in a fitted navy suit that tried too hard at dignity, while Tara scrolled her phone beside her, ignoring the bailiff's glare. At the defense table, Samuel Pike rose as Lucille approached. "You look radiant, Mrs. Harper," he said softly. "Radiant enough to ruin their morning," Lucille murmured back, taking her seat. When the judge entered, a lean woman with steel gray hair and the expression of someone who had no patience for theatrics, the courtroom rose. The gavel struck once and silence settled like dust. Allison Bloom versus Lucille M. Harper, the clerk read. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Lucille didn't flinch. She merely adjusted the pearl clasp at her neck, eyes steady on her daughter across the aisle. Allison's attorney, a smooth-talking man with cufflinks that glinted like small eyes, stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about greed, it's about concern. Mrs. Harper has exhibited patterns of diminished capacity, impulsive asset transfers, erratic decision-making, and signs of cognitive decline." He gestured toward Lucille as though presenting evidence to a jury of ghosts. Our client only wishes to ensure her mother's well-being and preserve the family estate from mismanagement. Lucille's lips curved faintly. Mismanagement, she whispered to Miriam. My least favorite form of projection. The attorney continued, holding up a folder of papers with performative weight. We've obtained statements suggesting Mrs. Harper's confusion, including an instance where she gave away valuable family heirlooms for free. Samuel rose before the man could continue. Objection, he said crisply. Counsel is misrepresenting a notarized and documented inheritance gift, authorized under state law. The judge lifted one eyebrow. Mr. Pike, your client intends to speak? She does, Your Honor. Lucille stood, every inch of her 82 years cloaked in composure. If I may? The judge nodded. Proceed, Mrs. Harper. Lucille reached into her structured black handbag and drew out a single folded page. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, edges softened from handling. She handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. I understand there's been some question of my mind's clarity, she said evenly. That's a fair thing to question, I suppose, if you've never truly used your own. A ripple of quiet laughter swept through the courtroom before dying under the judge's gavel. What you have there, Your Honor, Lucille continued, is a recipe for bourbon pie, written in my own hand, dated, signed, and notarized last month at the insistence of my lawyer. It's an old family recipe. Every measure exact. The notes include substitutions, oven temperatures, and a warning not to overwhip the cream. I defy anyone claiming diminished capacity to remember the difference between 6 tablespoons of bourbon and 7. Even the judge's mouth twitched at that. Samuel smiled faintly, sitting back as Miriam took the stand next. Mrs. Rhodes, the attorney began skeptically. You're a friend of Mrs. Harper's? 60 years, Miriam replied, smoothing her scarf. We do crosswords every Sunday. And would you say she's mentally competent? Miriam's eyes sparkled. She beats me every week, if that answers your question. A few chuckles rippled again. The judge tapped her pen once, then turned to Allison's lawyer. Do you have any further evidence? He hesitated, shuffling his papers. Not at this time, Your Honor. Then this hearing, the judge said, voice like a closing door, is concluded. She glanced toward Lucille. Mrs. Harper, you are free to manage your affairs as you see fit. The gavel struck once more. 10 minutes, start to finish. Lucille turned to Samuel, her tone dry. Efficient. My kind of justice. Outside, the courthouse steps were flanked with reporters, microphones poised like spears. The air shimmered with late-morning heat, the hum of cicadas blending with the murmur of gossip. Mrs. Harper, someone called. Do you have a comment about your daughter's petition? Lucille paused, the crowd parting instinctively. Cameras flashed. Her pearls gleamed white against the dark of her dress. Yes, she said calmly. I do. The reporters leaned forward. They buried the wrong person. Gasps rippled through the crowd, shutters snapping faster. Lucille gave them one measured smile, poised, deadly, unmistakably alive, then turned and descended the courthouse steps with Miriam at her side, her cane tapping the rhythm of a woman who had just reclaimed her name. 2 weeks after the courtroom spectacle, Savannah was still talking about Lucille Harper. The words, "they buried the wrong person," had become both a headline and a punchline, repeated at garden parties, bridge clubs, and whispered in grocery aisles between the cantaloupes and the cash register. Lucille, however, refused to speak another word about it. When the first reporter called for an exclusive, she let the phone ring twice before answering. No interviews, she said simply. Then she hung up and went back to polishing the edge of her teacup until it shone, but the story refused to die. A week later, WSEG News at 6 aired a feature titled, When Family Becomes Financial Predator, One Savannah Woman's Stand. The segment was polite but biting, narrated in that soft Southern cadence that could make even accusation sound like admiration. The footage rolled through shots of courthouse steps, the glint of Lucille's pearls, the infamous clip of her saying, "They buried the wrong person." The anchor's voice lingered on the words like a hymn. Then came the final scene, filmed quietly, almost reverently. Lucille sat in her garden, the silver spoon resting beside her teacup, the late sunlight spilling gold across her face. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The camera caught the faintest smile as she lifted her cup and took a single, unhurried sip. Cut to black. It lasted 5 seconds, but it was enough. Within hours, the clip spread online, not with the sensationalism of scandal, but with the quiet momentum of respect. Older women, widows, teachers, even retired nurses filled the comment sections with messages that read like, confessions and battle cries, Team Lucille. Finally, someone said what we all wanted to. She didn't lose her temper. She lost her tolerance. By midnight, someone had made a TikTok montage of her greatest lines. Blood isn't a bank account over slow piano music. A local bakery named a bourbon pecan tart the Lucille. Even the mayor's wife reposted the clip with a caption, Savannah women don't crumble, they crystallize. Lucille didn't watch it. Miriam did, sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and laughing so hard she nearly spilled her tea. They've turned you into a movement, she said, waving her phone at Lucille. You've got fan mail, dear, and hashtags. Do you even know what a hashtag is? Lucille looked up from her crossword. Something to do with noise, I believe. Noise, Miriam echoed, grinning. The good kind. The kind that drowns out your daughter's nonsense. Lucille's pen paused mid-word. Has Allison spoken publicly yet? Miriam's grin widened. She's trying. She went on a morning radio show. Said you were being manipulated by your lawyer. By me, even. Lucille's eyebrow arched. That would require her to believe I listen to anyone. Exactly, Miriam said. And Tara, well, that girl went live crying about how unfairly the media's treating her. It didn't land. Lucille folded her crossword and set it aside. Of course it didn't. Tears without truth are just theatrics. Across town, Samuel Pike sat at his desk reviewing yet another request from a national outlet. They all wanted the same thing. A quote, a soundbite, a statement from Savannah's newly minted folk hero. He chuckled quietly to himself, remembering the way she'd warned him. Never let them turn my life into a story they can sell. He called her later that evening, his voice warm. Lucille, you've become the face of independence. They're asking for interviews, columns, even a documentary. Her response was immediate. Decline them all. Samuel hesitated. You're sure? You could shape the narrative, make it... Samuel, she interrupted gently. I already did. He smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Of course you did. When she hung up, Lucille rose from her chair and crossed to the window. The evening air hummed with crickets, and in the distance, she could hear the faint echo of the church bells marking 8. Miriam appeared behind her, holding 2 teacups. You're trending again, she said lightly. Someone posted that photo of you at the cemetery, the one with the flowers and the headstone sketch. Lucille's gaze lingered on the darkened glass, her own reflection ghostly beside Miriam's. Let them talk. It keeps them occupied. Miriam handed her the cup. And what will you do while they talk? Lucille's lips curved as she turned toward the mantel, where the silver spoon still gleamed, under soft lamplight. The same thing I always do, she said. Plan the next step. She lifted her tea, the steam curling between them, fragrant and calm. Outside, lightning flickered far beyond the marsh, a silent warning of another storm on its way. Lucille didn't look away. "Let them watch," she murmured. "I'm not finished teaching them how power looks when it's quiet." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of savanna morning where sunlight filtered through the moss like gold lace. Lucille Harper sat at her mahogany writing desk, the same one she'd used to balance household ledgers and write thank you notes for half a century. Today, there was only one task before her. A single sheet of cream stationery lay on the blotter, her fountain pen poised above it. The ink was the deep blue she favored for final words. The salutation came easily. "My dear Allison and Tara." The rest took more time. Her handwriting, precise and elegant as her posture, carried no tremor. Line by line, she wrote what she'd rehearsed silently for years but never spoken aloud. Not apology, not explanation, just clarity. "You mistook my silence for surrender. You mistook my patience for permission. Both were errors." The pen glided steadily. "Legacy is not a birthright. It's a responsibility. I would have given you both the world if you had proven you could keep it clean. Instead, I leave you with what you earned. Absence." She paused, inhaling the faint scent of lavender wax from the candle burning nearby. The flame shivered slightly, as though listening. Her words sharpened as she continued. "By the time you read this, if ever, you will have discovered that I left nothing for you to fight over. I have chosen to invest in girls who will learn grace, independence, and restraint, the virtues you mistook for weakness." Lucille signed it with deliberate precision. Lucille M. Harper. She stared at the name for a long time, admiring the steadiness of her own hand. Then, carefully, she folded the paper into thirds, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it with wax. The embossed H in the center glimmered under the light. Final. Unyielding. For a brief moment she considered mailing it. There was a certain poetry in letting it arrive unannounced, landing like a ghost in their mailbox. But poetry, she decided, wasn't her goal anymore. Closure was. She rose, cane in hand, and crossed to the marble fireplace. The morning's fire still smoldered faintly from Miriam's tea-making. Lucille knelt carefully, old bones protesting, dignity refusing to yield, and laid the envelope on the grate. The wax caught first, curling into a slow, deliberate flame. Paper folded, browned, and blackened, releasing smoke that carried the faint scent of lavender and ink. Miriam's voice drifted from behind her. "That looks therapeutic." Lucille straightened, watching the edges crumble. "Letters are meant to deliver truth. Sometimes that means you. Don't let them reach the wrong address." Miriam, perched in her usual chair with a teacup in hand, raised it slightly. "To new recipients, then." Lucille's eyes flickered toward her friend, then to the small stack of documents on the side table. Thicker, weightier than a letter. "To better ones," she said. Miriam smiled. "Samuel dropped those off this morning?" Lucille nodded, reaching for the folder. "The Harper Educational Trust," she said, opening it. "Every cent redirected to scholarships for girls. Savannah, Charleston, Atlanta. Full tuition for etiquette and arts programs. The next generation of women who understand that civility and strength can coexist." Miriam exhaled, low and pleased. "You're turning vengeance into legacy." "I'm correcting the record," Lucille replied, "and ensuring my name funds purpose, not entitlement." She signed the final page, each stroke of the pen as crisp as her resolve. When she finished, she turned the document toward Miriam. "As my executor, you'll oversee its creation and growth. It should outlive us both." Miriam took the folder, eyes misting but voice steady. "You're certain?" Lucille's gaze was unflinching. "I'm 82, Miriam. Certainty is the last luxury I can afford, and I'm taking it." Miriam rose, the moment landing between them like quiet applause. "Then we celebrate," she said. "Something cold, something with bubbles." Lucille's lips curved. "Champagne at 10 in the morning?" Miriam poured anyway, filling two slender flutes from a chilled bottle she had tucked in her bag for emergencies. She handed one over, her grin bright. "You just burned your heirs and funded your afterlife. If that's not cause enough, I don't know what is." They clinked glasses lightly. "To peace," Miriam said. "To purpose," Lucille replied. They drank, laughter spilling through the sunlit room, soft and rich and unhurried. For the first time in months, the air around Lucille felt weightless. The ashes in the fireplace whispered, shifting as the last corner of the letter disintegrated. Outside, the wind carried the smoke through the open window, across the magnolia trees, toward the wide savanna sky. Lucille set her glass down and turned to Miriam, her eyes clear, her tone measured. That was the final tie. Miriam smiled knowingly. "And now?" Lucille looked toward the window, where sunlight played over the silver spoon resting on the mantel. Its polished surface reflected the room's golden glow, like a coin of memory she'd chosen to keep. "Now," she said softly, "we see who notices the silence." The letter arrived on pale pink stationery, thick and perfumed, the kind of paper used when sincerity wants to look expensive. Miriam found it first, wedged under the front door that morning like a misplaced apology. Lucille didn't open it right away. She sat in her favorite chair beside the window, reading the morning light instead, letting the envelope rest on her lap like a test she already knew she'd pass. When she finally slid it open with her silver letter opener, the first line was predictable enough. "Grandma, I thought you'd want to know. I had a baby." Tara's handwriting looped dramatically across the page, each flourish calculated, each word an attempt at nostalgia. She wrote of new motherhood, sleepless nights, and of wanting her child to know where she came from. The tone wavered somewhere between sentiment and strategy. Then came the real sentence, the one that revealed everything. "I think my baby deserves something from the family legacy." Lucille folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Her face didn't change, but her eyes hardened with the cool clarity that came from recognizing manipulation, even wrapped in pastel ink. Miriam looked up from her crossword, sensing the shift. "From the Bloom girl?" Lucille nodded. "Apparently she's become a mother." Miriam arched a brow. "Congratulations, I suppose?" Lucille's voice was calm. "Yes," she said, lifting her teacup. "Congratulations. I still remember the funeral." Miriam blinked. "The funeral?" Lucille sipped her tea, eyes far away. "The one where she whispered I was next." The room went quiet except for the faint creak of the ceiling fan. Outside, the garden stirred in the soft wind, blossoms nodding as though in agreement. Miriam leaned back, studying her friend. "So, what will you do?" Lucille reached for a file from her desk drawer. A crisp photocopy of her will, the public one, the one already filed and finalized. She set it on the blotter, flattening the pages. Then, from the drawer beside it, she pulled a small pad of yellow sticky notes. She wrote in steady cursive, "This is your legacy. Learn from it." She affixed the note neatly to the top page. Miriam's lips twitched. "You're actually sending that?" Lucille slid the pages into an envelope. "I've always believed lessons are most effective when they're tangible." She sealed it, pressed the flap, and placed it in the outgoing mail tray near the door. By afternoon, it was gone, carried off by the same postal carrier who had been delivering Lucille's correspondence for 20 years. He didn't ask questions. He never had to. 2 days later, Tara's video went live. Lucille wouldn't have known if not for Miriam's phone buzzing relentlessly over tea. "She's crying," Miriam said, adjusting her glasses. "Online, on camera, in... Oh, for heaven's sake. She's using the baby as a prop. Lucille didn't look up from her teacup. Describe it. She's saying you mailed her a copy of the will, claims it's a form of emotional abuse. Miriam paused, scrolling. Oh, listen to this. My grandmother thinks shame is love. Lucille stirred her tea once, the spoon's chime measured and precise. At least, she finally understands, I think. Miriam nearly snorted. The comments are brutal. People aren't siding with her this time. Lucille raised an eyebrow. No? No. They're calling her out. One says, she wanted the inheritance but not the integrity. Another says, Lucille Harper is a legend. Don't test her. Lucille set her cup down. The world's growing sharper. Perhaps they're learning. Miriam grinned. Maybe you're the teacher they needed. Lucille smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the spoon beside her saucer. Teaching was always the point. Forgiveness was never part of the curriculum. Outside, the late sun slanted through the magnolias, gilding the garden in amber. The light caught on the edge of her cane, on the silver spoon gleaming quietly on the mantel, a silent witness to every lesson given, every line drawn. Miriam broke the silence with a sigh. Do you ever wonder if she'll stop trying? Lucille's gaze drifted toward the window, where the reflection of the garden shimmered like an oil painting. She will, she said softly. The moment she realizes legacy can't be inherited, it has to be earned. The last of the day's light flickered across her face, drawing out the fine lines of age and victory both. She reached for her teacup again, lifting it in a private toast toward the darkening horizon. To lessons learned, she murmured. Miriam matched her motion. And to students who finally fail. Lucille's smile deepened, not cruel, but complete. Exactly. The evening breeze carried the faintest echo of laughter through the open window, mingling with the rustle of the trees and the soft tick of the clock. In the fading light, the silver spoon caught a single beam of gold before dusk swallowed it whole. The sky above Savannah was the color of tarnished silver the morning Lucille Harper rode to Samuel Pike's office. The wind off the river carried the promise of rain, the kind that scrubbed everything clean but left the ghosts visible again. Miriam sat beside her in the car, a slim folder in her lap, her fingers tapping its edge in rhythm with the windshield wipers. You're quiet, she said finally. Lucille adjusted her gloves. I've been speaking for 82 years, she replied. Silence is overdue. Samuel's office, when they arrived, was unchanged, the same polished walnut shelves, the same faint scent of lemon oil and legal ink. But this time, there was something solemn in the air. Not tension, finality. Mrs. Harper, Samuel said, standing as she entered. You look formidable as ever. Lucille smiled slightly. One must dress properly for an ending. Miriam took her seat near the window, opening her umbrella just enough to shake off the raindrops before closing it again. Let's make sure this one sticks, she said, half under her breath. Samuel nodded, understanding. He reached into his drawer and drew out a long, cream-colored envelope, sealed in red wax, the same one Lucille had given him years earlier. The seal still gleamed like blood under lamplight. Your real will, he said. Untouched, since the day you handed it to me. Lucille's gaze didn't waver. Open it. He broke the seal carefully, as though performing surgery. The scent of old parchment filled the room. He unfolded the pages, smoothing them with deliberate precision. The words were familiar, written in Lucille's steady hand, her language elegant but unflinching. Every line spoke of intention, not sentiment. This, Samuel said softly, reading aloud, confirms that all personal assets, real property, and financial holdings are hereby transferred to the Harper Educational Trust for the advancement of etiquette, arts, and civic education for young women in need. He looked up. Not a single personal beneficiary? Lucille met his eyes. Not one. Family already had their inheritance. They just didn't recognize it. Miriam exhaled, something between a sigh and a laugh. You've just outlived them all without dying. Lucille's lips curved. That was the point. Samuel reached for his pen, his voice returning to its precise rhythm. I'll need your signature here, Mrs. Harper. And yours, Mrs. Rhodes, as witness. Lucille signed first, the black ink flowing steady and sure. Miriam followed, her loops quick and firm. The two signatures gleamed side by side, evidence of a pact made in friendship and clarity. When they finished, Samuel stamped the document with his firm's notary seal, the echo of the press filling the quiet like a gavel strike. This one, he said, sealing it into a new envelope marked Private Case Number 237B, is bulletproof. Confidential filing under an I, independent trust designation, no contest possible, no claim admissible. Lucille nodded once. Perfect. He hesitated, then reached across the desk and took her hand. His palm was warm, steady. You've done something extraordinary, Lucille. This one will outlive them all. Her eyes softened, though her tone did not. Good. I built too much dignity in this life to have it buried with me. Miriam stood, brushing an invisible thread from her coat. Then it's done, she said. The curtain closes. Lucille's gaze lingered on the stack of papers, on the ink still drying, on the seal that shimmered faintly like a quiet vow. Not quite, she said. Curtains are for theater. This is real. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the windows in a slow, relentless rhythm. Samuel escorted them to the door, and for a brief moment, the three of them stood together under the soft glow of the office lights. Lucille adjusted her hat, tucking one errant strand of hair behind her ear. File it today, she said. Before noon, Samuel promised. They stepped out into the wet morning, the sound of her cane tapping against the stone walkway like punctuation at the end of a sentence she'd been writing her entire life. By the next afternoon, the ripples had already reached the Bloom household. Allison opened her front door to a uniformed courier holding a thick envelope marked Certified Delivery, Legal Notice. Her name was typed across the front in neat black letters. She signed, barely glancing up, then tore it open on the spot. The first line was simple, brutal, and impossible to misinterpret. Notification of permanent exclusion. Her eyes skimmed the legal jargon that followed. Revoked claims, irrevocable designations, standing removed. Each word was a blade. At the bottom, beneath the crisp black letterhead, was Samuel Pike's signature, and Lucille's, bold and clear. The final clause read, Allison Bloom and any direct descendants are hereby and permanently disqualified from inheritance or claim under any form of estate associated with Lucille M. Harper or the Harper Educational Trust. Her breath hitched. She can't, but she could. Across town, in her quiet parlor, Lucille Harper sat by the window, tea steaming beside her, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds at last. Miriam sat nearby, knitting something soft and golden. Lucille looked out over her garden, where the rain had left everything clean, gleaming. It's done, she said. Miriam didn't look up. How do you feel? Lucille smiled faintly, her reflection shimmering in the glass. Light, she said. Lighter than I've felt in years. Then, after a pause, she added, let her open that letter and realize it isn't vengeance, it's punctuation. The spoon on the mantel glimmered in the soft light, silver, steady, and untarnished. Outside, the church bells rang 3 times, steady, final, echoing through the wet streets like the closing of a book. The Savannah cemetery was quiet except for the slow murmur of wind through the live oaks. Spanish moss swayed like draped silk above the path as Lucille Harper walked its length, her cane clicking against the cobblestones in steady, deliberate rhythm. The afternoon sun hung low, gold against the marble markers, soft against the grief that wasn't grief at all, but reflection. She paused at the familiar turn where the stones grew older, names fading into memory. Her husband's grave waited beneath a magnolia tree heavy with bloom. The scent was sweet and sharp, like something that wanted to linger. Lucille approached the headstone, running her gloved fingertips along the engraved words. The surface was newly polished, her husband's name standing bold as ever, Robert C. Harper, 1928–1993. Just below it now, carved with the same precision, gleamed her own. Lucille M. Harper, 1941, a single dash, the unfinished line of a life not yet concluded. She smiled. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose we're sharing space again?" The groundskeeper had done good work. The stone gleamed in the late sun, edges smooth, lettering crisp. A quiet promise of permanence. Miriam Rhodes stood a few paces behind, holding a paper bag filled with fresh flowers from her shop. Cream roses and pale blue hydrangeas, Lucille's favorites. "You really did it," she said, her tone half awe, half affection. "Had your name carved while you're still standing upright." Lucille turned slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting. "I've never trusted other people to get the details right." Miriam knelt and began arranging the blooms at the base of the grave. "You know," she said, tying the bouquet's ribbon with a neat bow, "most people plan funerals to make others comfortable." Lucille adjusted her hat. "I'm not most people." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years stretching between them. Friendship, battles, secrets, laughter. Lucille's gaze drifted to the empty space beside the headstone. "I suppose it's nearly time to write the last note." Miriam straightened. "For the will? For the funeral?" Miriam blinked. "You're writing your own eulogy?" Lucille's tone was cool, matter of fact. "Just a few words. Not everything requires a speech." Later that evening, in her parlor lit by the soft amber of lamplight, Lucille set her fountain pen to paper once more. The stationery was simple this time, no monogram, no flourish. Just truth in its purest form. Her handwriting flowed easily, unhurried. "If you are here for money, you've come to the wrong place. If you are here for memory, take one and leave the rest. Either way, mind your posture." She read it once, smiled faintly, and folded it with care. The letter went into a cream envelope labeled "To be read at the service." Miriam watched from across the table, a glass of wine in her hand. "It's concise," she said. "I'd have added something about humility, but perhaps they'll learn that in the silence." Lucille glanced up. "You'll read it for me?" Miriam nodded. "Word for word." Lucille reached across the table and touched her friend's wrist, an uncharacteristic gesture of warmth. "You're the only one I'd trust not to improvise." "Improvisation was never my talent," Miriam said lightly. "Loyalty, however, I've perfected." Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the river, a low, familiar sound. Lucille took it as a sign, not omen or warning, just acknowledgement. The weather had always been a participant in her story. On the mantel, the silver spoon still gleamed under lamplight, catching every flicker of the storm. By the week's end, Samuel Pike visited to finalize one last administrative detail. The Harper Educational Trust now included a line item Lucille insisted on herself: permanent floral maintenance. All arrangements sourced exclusively from Rhodes and Cumber flowers. "Every funeral deserves something beautiful," Lucille said when he raised an eyebrow. "Even mine." "Prepaid?" Samuel asked. Lucille's lips curved. "Naturally. Beauty, like revenge, should never be left on credit." Miriam laughed. I'll make sure the arrangements are perfect, all white, simple, like defiance disguised as grace. Lucille nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I want them to misunderstand. Samuel closed his briefcase, pausing at the door. You've thought of everything, he said softly. I've had time, Lucille replied. When he left, the house settled into quiet again. The wind rustled the curtains, bringing with it the faint scent of rain and gardenias. Lucille walked to the window, her reflection framed in shadow and silver. From where she stood, she could see the tops of the oaks, the wide sweep of the river, and the fading horizon where the sky met the water like a promise. Miriam joined her, the two women silhouetted by the glow of the lamps. You know, she said, when the time comes, they'll call it her funeral. But it won't be, really. It'll just be your last lesson. Lucille's gaze stayed on the distance. Exactly, she said quietly. And the best lessons, Miriam, are the ones they don't realize they're learning. She turned toward the fire then, dropping the sealed funeral letter onto the mantel beside the silver spoon. Both gleamed under the low light, symbols of closure and consequence, polished to the same calm perfection. The thunder outside grew softer, the storm moving farther down the river. Lucille stood for a long moment, watching the spoon catch firelight one last time before whispering, "That will do." The morning of Lucille Harper's funeral dawned strangely beautiful, Savannah wrapped in fog, the air heavy with magnolia and salt. Spanish moss swayed like lace veils from the old oak, branches above the cemetery, brushing the shoulders of those who moved quietly between rows of marble. The Harper family plot gleamed under the softened light. The new headstone stood complete now. Lucille M. Harper, 1941-2024. The carved dash finally filled, polished, and final. The inscription below was simple. Dignity outlasts blood. The guests arrived in whispers. Neighbors, old students, society women in pearls. They gathered under the canopy of oaks where Lucille had once walked with her cane, her every step an act of ownership. A white tent shielded the casket from the damp, though sunlight filtered through in thin ribbons. Miriam Rhodes stood at the front, dressed in muted gray. The years had softened her hair, but not her poise. She held a single folded page, Lucille's final letter, between fingers that trembled only once before she steadied them. Samuel Pike stood beside her, solemn, carrying the portfolio that contained the will. When everyone was seated, the soft hum of cicadas fading into reverent silence, Miriam stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was low but clear. "This," she said, unfolding the paper, "is from Lucille. She asked that it be read at the service, word for word." The crowd leaned in, the rustle of fabric the only sound. Miriam read, "If you are here for money, you've come to the wrong place. If you are here for memory, take one and leave the rest. Either way, mind your posture." The words hung in the air, sharp and elegant, unmistakably hers. A few muffled gasps drifted from the back. Someone stifled a laugh. Someone else dabbed their eyes. Miriam folded the letter and set it gently atop the casket, her expression one of both loss and victory. Then it was Samuel's turn. He moved to the podium, the creak of the wooden step loud in the hush. The legal folder gleamed black against his crisp suit. He spoke with the careful diction of a man who understood the weight of every syllable. "As executor of Mrs. Harper's estate," he began, "I am here to read her last and binding will. Filed under private case number 237B, all previous filings are hereby void." Allison Bloom stiffened in her chair, her jaw tightening. Tara sat beside her, sunglasses covering eyes that had already begun to glisten. Samuel continued, his tone unshakable. "Under Article 1, all real property, financial holdings, and estate assets are transferred in perpetuity to the Harper Educational Trust. established for the education and advancement of young women in the arts and etiquette. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He turned the page deliberately. Under Article 2, beneficiaries specifically excluded from the trust are as follows. He paused, reading the first line slowly, deliberately. Miss Tara Bloom. The words fell like a thunderclap in the still air. Even the cicadas stopped. All eyes turned toward Tara. Her mouth opened, then shut. A single tear tracked through her makeup, landing on her black dress like ink. Samuel went on, calm as a surgeon. This exclusion is absolute and permanent. No appeal, no redress. This clause supersedes all previous documentation. Allison rose halfway to her feet, her face flushed. This is cruel, unethical. But Miriam's voice cut through, even and final. It's legal, and it's Lucille. The tension broke like glass. A few guests exchanged glances, some disapproving, most quietly satisfied. Savannah loved nothing more than a reckoning dressed in civility. Samuel closed the folder, his tone softening. In accordance with her wishes, no flowers have been sent by the family. All arrangements here today are provided by Rhodes and Coated Flowers, prepaid by Mrs. Harper herself. Miriam smiled faintly, tilting her head toward the rows of perfect white hydrangeas framing the casket. She wanted beauty, not apology. Samuel nodded, then stepped aside. The service was brief after that. A hymn hummed low, words blurred by the thickness of the air. A dove startled from a nearby branch, its wings flashing white against the moss. When it ended, guests rose slowly, murmuring in tones meant to sound sympathetic but edged with admiration. They drifted toward their cars, heels clicking on stone, conversations hushed but electric. Allison stood frozen by the grave, her hands shaking. Tara hovered beside her, pale and silent. They didn't approach the casket. They didn't speak to Miriam or Samuel. The unspoken truth lingered between them. They had come for closure and found only consequence. When the last of the crowd had gone, Miriam stepped forward again. The sun had begun to pierce the fog, casting gold through the trees. She reached into her bag and drew out a small velvet pouch. From it, she removed a single polished silver spoon, the same one Lucille had once placed on her mantle. She set it gently atop the casket, just above the engraved name. The light caught it perfectly, a gleam of reflection and defiance both. Samuel watched, his throat tightening. She planned even this. Miriam smiled faintly. Of course she did. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The sound of the river carried faintly from beyond the trees. Then Miriam straightened, her eyes glistening but proud. She told me once, she said softly, that revenge wasn't about punishment, it was about precision. Samuel nodded, his voice low. And she was precise to the end. They stood there until the groundskeeper came to lower the casket, the last threads of light slipping through the moss. As the lid descended, the silver spoon caught one final flash of gold before fading into shadow. Miriam whispered the last words Lucille had ever spoken to her, just loud enough for Samuel to hear. She whispered I was next, she said, but I wrote her out first. The breeze stirred, lifting the moss, and somewhere, faintly, the sound of laughter seemed to echo across the graves.